My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I used to believe that family bonds were unbreakable. I worked as a financial advisor at a premier investment firm in downtown Seattle, pulling in a comfortable mid-six-figure salary that afforded me a beautiful home in Bellevue with my wife of 7 years, Sarah. My life was everything I had worked for since graduating from the University of Washington with my MBA. I had the career, the house, the woman I loved, and most importantly, I had my younger brother Daniel, who I considered my best friend and closest confidant. Daniel Thompson was 29 years old, 5 years younger than me, and worked as a freelance graphic designer. After our parents died in a car accident when I was 25 and he was 20, I had essentially raised him, helping him through college and supporting him as he built his career. Daniel lived in a modest apartment in Capitol Hill, and Sarah and I had him over for dinner at least twice a week. He was the godfather to our 2-year-old daughter Emma, and Sarah often joked that Daniel was like the brother she never had. Our family unit felt complete and secure. Sarah Thompson, 32 years old, worked as a pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital. We met during my first year at the investment firm when I was brought to the emergency room after a minor car accident. She was the nurse who took care of me that night, and I knew within minutes of talking to her that she was special. Sarah was compassionate, intelligent, and had this way of making everyone around her feel valued and heard. She got along perfectly with Daniel from the day I introduced them, and watching them develop their own sibling-like relationship was one of the things I treasured most about our life together. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was driving to an important client meeting on Interstate 405 when a semi-truck ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my BMW. The impact was so severe that I was airlifted to Harborview Medical Center, where I slipped into a medically induced coma. The doctors told Sarah that I had suffered severe traumatic brain injury, multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding. My chances of survival were uncertain, and if I did survive, there was no guarantee that I would ever be the same person who had kissed her goodbye that morning. For 3 months, I existed in complete darkness while my body fought to heal itself. I have no memories of that time, no awareness of the machines keeping me alive, and no knowledge of the conversations happening around my bedside. What I didn't know was that during those 3 months, my wife and my brother were having those conversations, growing closer in their shared grief and fear, and eventually crossing a line that would change everything forever. When I finally opened my eyes on a sunny Thursday afternoon in June, the first face I saw was Sarah's. She was sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand, and when she realized I was awake, she started crying tears of joy. The second person to arrive was Daniel, who had been called immediately when I woke up. He rushed into the room and embraced me carefully, telling me how scared he had been and how grateful he was that I had come back to them. The initial weeks of my recovery were challenging but hopeful. I had to relearn basic motor functions, undergo speech therapy, and slowly rebuild my strength. Sarah took extended leave from her job to care for me, and Daniel visited every single day, bringing me books, helping with my physical therapy exercises, and keeping me entertained with stories about his design projects. Emma, our daughter, was initially scared of all the medical equipment, but gradually warmed up to having Daddy home again. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Sarah was attentive and loving, Daniel was supportive and encouraging, and our family appeared to be healing together from the trauma of my accident. But there were small things that didn't quite feel right. Sarah seemed distant sometimes, lost in thought in ways that she never had before. Daniel was more nervous around me, less spontaneous with his jokes and stories. There were moments when I would catch them exchanging glances that seemed to carry some kind of unspoken communication. I attributed these changes to the stress we had all been under. After all, they had spent 3 months not knowing if I would live or die, and now they were adjusting to having me back, but different, slower, more dependent than I had been before. It made sense that the dynamics would feel off for a while. I was grateful just to be alive and surrounded by the people I loved most. About 6 weeks into my recovery, I was finally strong enough to return home. Sarah had converted our downstairs guest room into a temporary bedroom for me since I couldn't yet handle the stairs to our master suite. Daniel helped move my things and set up a comfortable space where I could continue my rehabilitation. The three of us fell into a routine where Sarah would help me with my morning exercises. Daniel would come over for lunch and keep me company during the afternoon, and evenings were spent as a family watching movies or playing board games. It was during this time that I started noticing more subtle signs that something was wrong. Sarah's phone was always face down now, and she would take calls in other rooms. Daniel seemed uncomfortable whenever Sarah and I showed affection toward each other, looking away or finding excuses to leave the room. There were times when I would wake up from naps to find them in quiet, intense conversations that would stop abruptly when they noticed I was awake. The breakthrough came 2 months after I returned home. I was supposed to be napping in the afternoon, but I had woken up early and was lying quietly in bed when I heard Sarah and Daniel talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but in the silence of the house, I could make out most of their conversation. "We can't keep doing this," Sarah was saying. "It's not fair to him, and it's not fair to Emma." "I know," Daniel replied. "But I can't just turn off how I feel about you. These past 5 months have changed everything for me." "For me too," Sarah said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "But he's getting stronger every day. Soon he'll be back to normal, and then what? We just pretend this never happened?" "Maybe we don't have to pretend," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe it's time to tell him the truth." I felt like I'd been hit by that semi-truck all over again. My wife and my brother were having an affair, and it had been going on for 5 months, which meant it had started while I was in the coma. While I was fighting for my life, unconscious and helpless, the two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. I lay there in that bed, listening to them discuss their relationship and my future as if I were a problem to be managed rather than a person whose life they had destroyed. The physical pain from my injuries was nothing compared to the emotional devastation I felt in that moment. But along with the pain came something else, a cold, calculating anger that I had never experienced before. Instead of confronting them immediately, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I was going to let them continue believing that I was oblivious to their affair while I gathered evidence and planned my response. My background in financial analysis had taught me the value of thorough research and strategic planning. I was going to approach this betrayal the same way I approached complex investment decisions, with patience, precision, and a focus on maximizing returns. Over the next several weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I started paying closer attention to their interactions, noting the subtle touches, the meaningful glances, and the way they seemed to communicate without words. I pretended to nap more often, giving them opportunities to talk freely while I listened from the next room. I began observing their schedules, noting when Daniel's visits coincided with times when Emma was at daycare or with Sarah's mother. If you enjoy stories of calculated revenge and shocking betrayals, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The evidence I gathered painted a picture that was even worse than I had initially imagined. Their affair hadn't been a gradual emotional connection that had slowly turned physical. According to the conversations I overheard, Daniel had kissed Sarah for the first time just 2 weeks after my accident, when she was at her most vulnerable and scared. He had taken advantage of her emotional state and his position as my trusted brother to seduce my wife while I was unconscious in a hospital bed. What made it even more devastating was learning that they had been intimate in our home, in our bed, while I was lying in a coma just miles away. They had made love in the same room where Emma slept when she had nightmares, where Sarah and I had planned our future, where we had shared 7 years of marriage. The violation felt complete and irreversible. But the most damaging revelation came when I heard Sarah on the phone with her sister one evening. She was in the backyard, thinking I was asleep, when she said something that changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. "I know it's complicated, Lisa," she was saying, "but I've never felt this way about anyone, not even Marcus. Daniel makes me feel alive in a way that I forgot was possible. I think I might actually be in love with him." The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a moment of weakness or a temporary lapse in judgment brought on by stress and fear. Sarah was in love with my brother. She had chosen him over me, over our marriage, over the family we had built together. The woman I had trusted with my life, my heart, and my child's future had decided that my brother was worth more to her than I was. That night, lying in the darkness of our guest room, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I wasn't going to simply divorce Sarah and cut ties with Daniel. I wasn't going to quietly disappear and let them build a life together on the ashes of my trust. I was going to make sure that their betrayal cost them everything, just like it had cost me everything. I spent the next month planning my revenge with the same meticulous attention to detail that I brought to my most complex financial strategies. I researched private investigators, divorce attorneys, and asset protection specialists. I opened new bank accounts that Sarah couldn't access, and began quietly moving money to secure my financial future and Emma's college fund. I documented every conversation I overheard, every suspicious behavior, and every piece of evidence that proved their affair. Most importantly, I began rebuilding my physical strength faster than anyone expected. My doctors were amazed at my progress, attributing it to determination and good genes. They had no idea that my recovery was being fueled by pure rage and the promise of justice. Every physical therapy session, every painful exercise, every step toward normalcy was motivated by my plan for revenge. The turning point came 6 weeks later when I overheard Sarah and Daniel making plans to tell me about their relationship. They had decided that they couldn't continue living a lie, and they were going to sit me down and explain that they had fallen in love during my recovery. They planned to ask for my understanding and my blessing, as if their betrayal was some kind of romantic love story rather than the destruction of my family. "He's so much better now," Sarah was saying, "almost back to his old self. I think he'll understand if we explain it the right way." "I hope so," Daniel replied. "I hate lying to him. He's been through so much already." The audacity of their conversation was breathtaking. They were worried about lying to me while planning to steal my wife and destroy my marriage. They wanted my understanding for their betrayal, as if I should be grateful that they had found love while I was fighting for my life. That's when I knew it was time to execute my plan. I had gathered enough evidence to destroy them both, and I had rebuilt enough strength to handle whatever came next. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be nothing like what they were expecting. But first, I needed to make one final preparation that would ensure my revenge was not just devastating, but absolutely perfect in its execution. My final preparation involved something that neither Sarah nor Daniel would ever suspect. I contacted my old college roommate, Jake Mitchell, who now worked as a cybersecurity specialist for a major tech company in Silicon Valley. Jake owed me a significant favor from years ago when I had helped him through a difficult financial situation, and he was more than willing to help when I explained what I needed. "Marcus, man, I'm so sorry this happened to you," Jake said during our encrypted video call. "What you're asking for is completely legal, but it's going to be devastating. Are you sure you want to go this route?" I looked at him through the screen, thinking about everything Sarah and Daniel had stolen from me while I was unconscious and helpless. "Jake, they made their choice when they decided to betray me while I was in a coma. I'm just making sure there are consequences for that choice." Within 48 hours, Jake had installed discrete monitoring software on our home Wi-Fi network that would capture and record all digital communications from any device connected to it. This included text messages, emails, social media activity, and even deleted files from both Sarah's and Daniel's devices. Everything was being stored on a secure server that only I could access, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence that would prove their affair beyond any doubt. The beauty of Jake's system was that it was completely invisible to Sarah and Daniel. They continued using their phones and laptops normally, having intimate conversations over text, sharing photos and making plans, all while unknowingly documenting their own betrayal in crystal clear detail. Within 2 weeks, I had accumulated hundreds of messages between them, explicit photos they had exchanged, and even recordings of phone conversations where they discussed their feelings for each other and their plans for the future. The most damaging evidence came in the form of a text conversation between Sarah and Daniel from just 3 days after my accident, while I was still in the ICU fighting for my life. Sarah had written, "I can't stop thinking about what you said at the hospital. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is our chance to finally be together." Daniel had responded, "I've been in love with you since the day Marcus introduced us. I never thought I'd have a chance, but now..." The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., exactly 72 hours after the semi-truck had nearly killed me. Reading those messages felt like being hit by that truck all over again, but it also crystallized my resolve. They hadn't just betrayed me during my recovery. They had begun planning their affair while I was still on life support. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated decision to steal my life while I was powerless to defend it. 3 weeks later, Sarah and Daniel finally worked up the courage to have the conversation with me. It was a Sunday evening, and Emma was spending the night at Sarah's mother's house. I was in the living room, pretending to read a financial magazine, when they both came in and sat down across from me with serious expressions on their faces. "Marcus," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly, "Daniel and I need to talk to you about something important." I looked up from my magazine with what I hoped appeared to be mild curiosity rather than the cold fury I was actually feeling. "Of course. What's going on?" Daniel cleared his throat nervously. "This is really hard to say, but while you were in the hospital, Sarah and we grew closer. We were both so scared of losing you, and we found comfort in each other. We fell in love," Sarah added quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. "I know this is terrible timing, and I know it's not what you want to hear, but we can't keep pretending that our feelings don't exist." I set down my magazine and looked at them both, letting the silence stretch for several long seconds. They were both fidgeting, clearly expecting anger or tears or some kind of emotional breakdown. Instead, I nodded slowly, as if I was processing difficult but understandable information. "I see," I said calmly. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah and Daniel exchanged a quick glance, and I could see them making a split-second decision about how much truth to tell me. "It started about a month ago," Daniel said, which I knew was a lie. "We tried to fight it, but the feelings were too strong." "We want to be honest with you," Sarah added. "We don't want to sneak around or lie anymore. We're hoping that maybe in time you can understand and even be happy for us." The audacity of their performance was breathtaking. They were asking for my blessing to continue their affair, presenting it as some kind of noble gesture of honesty rather than the culmination of months of deception and betrayal. They wanted me to thank them for finally telling me the truth, even though the truth they were telling was itself a lie. "I appreciate your honesty," I said, keeping my voice steady and reasonable. "This is obviously a lot to process. I think I need some time to think about everything." Relief flooded both of their faces. They had expected screaming, accusations, perhaps even violence. Instead, I was responding like the rational, understanding person they remembered from before my accident. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for being so mature about this," she said. "I know it's not easy, but I really believe this could work out for all of us. We could still be a family." just different than before. I squeezed her hand back, marveling at how easy it was to lie when you knew the truth was going to be so much more powerful. Let me think about it for a few days, okay? This is a big decision for everyone involved. Over the next week, I let them believe that I was seriously considering their proposal. I asked thoughtful questions about how it would work, how we would explain it to Emma, what it would mean for our living situation. Sarah and Daniel were encouraged by my apparent openness, and they began making plans for their future together with increasing boldness. During this time, Jake's monitoring system captured everything. Text messages where they celebrated my positive reaction, photos they shared while planning their new life together, even recorded phone calls where Sarah told her sister that I was being amazing about the whole situation, and that she thought we could all be one big happy family. The most devastating recording came from a conversation between Daniel and his friend from college, where Daniel bragged about how he had always wanted Sarah, and how my accident had given him the perfect opportunity to make his move. He laughed as he described how I was so grateful to be alive that I was willing to share my wife rather than lose my family entirely. That recording sealed their fate. I made copies of everything and stored them in multiple secure locations. Then I called my attorney, Rebecca Morgan, who had handled my estate planning and business contracts for years. Rebecca was known for her discretion and her ruthless effectiveness in high-stakes divorce cases. "Marcus," she said after reviewing the evidence I had gathered, "this is one of the most clear-cut cases of adultery and fraud I've ever seen. With this level of documentation, we can destroy them both legally and financially. Are you prepared for what that's going to look like?" I thought about Emma, about the life we had built together, about the future I had imagined before that semi-truck changed everything. Then I thought about Sarah and Daniel celebrating their betrayal while I was unconscious, planning their life together while I fought for mine, and asking for my blessing to complete the theft of my family. "Rebecca," I said, "I want you to hit them with everything we have. I want them to understand that actions have consequences, and that some betrayals demand the highest price." The first phase of my revenge began the following Monday. Rebecca filed divorce papers that included every piece of evidence we had gathered, along with a detailed timeline of the affair that proved it had begun while I was in a coma. The filing requested full custody of Emma, citing Sarah's adultery with my brother as evidence of her moral unfitness as a parent. But the legal filing was just the beginning. I had learned from my own experience in financial consulting that the most effective strategies attack multiple fronts simultaneously. While Rebecca handled the legal aspects, I began implementing the other components of my plan. I contacted Sarah's supervisor at Seattle Children's Hospital and provided evidence of her affair, including the text messages and photos that proved she had been using hospital breaks to communicate with Daniel while she was supposed to be caring for sick children. The hospital had strict policies about personal conduct that reflected on their professional reputation, and Sarah's very public adultery scandal made her a liability they couldn't afford. For Daniel, I used my connections in the Seattle business community to ensure that his graphic design clients learned about his character. I didn't need to embellish or lie. I simply made sure that the truth about his affair with his brother's wife, while his brother was in a coma, became widely known among the professional network he depended on for freelance work. The most devastating blow came when I revealed that I had been aware of their affair for weeks and had been recording their conversations and gathering evidence the entire time. I called them both into the living room on a Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after they had asked for my blessing. "I want to thank you both," I began, watching their faces carefully. "Your honesty last week meant a lot to me, and I've made my decision about how to handle this situation." Sarah and Daniel both leaned forward expectantly, smiles starting to form on their faces as they anticipated my acceptance of their relationship. "I've decided to give you exactly what you deserve," I continued. "Sarah, you'll be receiving divorce papers tomorrow morning, along with evidence that proves your affair began while I was in a coma. Daniel, you'll be interested to know that I've been recording our conversations for the past month, including some very revealing discussions about your feelings for my wife and your gratitude for the opportunity my near-death experience provided. The color drained from both of their faces as they realized what I was saying. Sarah tried to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I know the truth," I said, my voice calm but carrying the full weight of my anger. "I know that your affair started 3 days after my accident. I know that you've been sleeping together in our bed while I was unconscious in the hospital. I know that you planned this entire seduction while I was fighting for my life. And I know that you've been laughing about how grateful I am to be alive." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we had planned to raise Emma and grow old together. "You wanted honesty, so here's some honesty for you. You're both sociopaths who took advantage of a man in a coma to steal his life. You destroyed a family, traumatized a child, and betrayed the most basic bonds of trust that hold society together." Daniel finally found his voice. "Marcus, please, you don't understand. We never meant for this to happen. We were just trying to cope with the fear of losing you." I turned back to face them, and I could see my reflection in the window behind me. I looked like a different person than the man who had left for that client meeting 6 months ago. I looked harder, colder, but also somehow more focused and determined. "You're right," I said. "You never meant for this to happen. You meant for me to die in that accident so you could be together without all this messy explanation. But I survived. And now you have to face the consequences of your choices." The legal and professional consequences unfolded exactly as Rebecca had predicted. Sarah lost her job at the hospital, and with the evidence of her adultery being part of the public court record, she found it nearly impossible to find employment at other medical facilities in the Seattle area. Her nursing license was suspended pending an ethics review, effectively ending the career she had spent years building. Daniel's graphic design business collapsed even more quickly. Word of his affair spread through Seattle's close-knit creative community, and his existing clients began canceling contracts while potential new clients refused to work with him. The man who had once been building a successful freelance career found himself unemployable in his chosen field. The custody battle was swift and decisive. Washington state courts take a dim view of adultery, especially when it involves betraying a spouse who is medically incapacitated. Rebecca presented evidence that Sarah had been neglecting Emma's emotional needs while pursuing her affair, including text messages where Sarah complained about having to care for our daughter when she wanted to be with Daniel. I was awarded full physical custody of Emma, with Sarah receiving only supervised visitation rights. The judge noted in his ruling that Sarah's conduct showed a pattern of deception and moral bankruptcy that raises serious questions about her fitness as a parent. But the most satisfying element of my revenge was something that neither Sarah nor Daniel saw coming. During the weeks when I was pretending to consider their proposal, I had been working with a private investigator to gather information about their future plans. I learned that they had been secretly looking at apartments together, researching jobs in other cities where they could start fresh, and even discussing marriage once my divorce was finalized. Using this information, I arranged for them to find what appeared to be the perfect opportunity, a graphic design job for Daniel at a boutique marketing firm in Portland, with a salary that would allow them to rent a beautiful apartment and start their new life together. What they didn't know was that the job offer was fake, created by the private investigator using a shell company and temporary offices. Daniel and Sarah moved to Portland, using their combined savings to pay first and last month's rent on an expensive apartment and cover moving expenses. Daniel showed up for his first day of work to find empty offices and disconnected phone numbers. They were stranded in a new city with no job, no local connections, and rapidly dwindling financial resources. The beauty of this final twist was that it forced them to confront the reality of their situation without the safety net they had assumed would always be there. Sarah couldn't return to Seattle because her reputation was destroyed. Daniel couldn't restart his business because his client base was gone. They were trapped together, with only each other to blame for the disaster their lives had become. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from Sarah. She was working as a waitress in Portland, living in a studio apartment with Daniel, who had taken a job stocking shelves at a grocery store. She wrote that she understood why I had done what I did, and that she hoped someday I could forgive them both. I read the letter once and then threw it away. Forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford, and they were a chapter of my life that was permanently closed. Emma and I moved to a new house in Redmond, closer to my office and far from the memories of our old life. I enrolled her in an excellent private school and made sure she had regular sessions with a child psychologist to help her process the changes in our family. She adapted remarkably well, showing the same resilience that had helped me survive my accident and rebuild my life. My career flourished in ways I hadn't expected. The discipline and strategic thinking I had developed during my recovery and revenge planning made me more effective at my job. I was promoted to senior partner at my firm and began specializing in high-stakes financial consulting for clients going through major life transitions. 2 years after my accident, I met Jennifer Walsh at a charity fundraiser for traumatic brain injury research. She was a pediatric surgeon at the University of Washington Medical Center, brilliant and compassionate, but with her own experience of betrayal from a previous marriage. We understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation, and our relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on honesty and genuine respect. Emma adored Jennifer from the moment they met, and watching them together reminded me that trust could be rebuilt, that families could be healed, and that the best revenge against those who try to destroy your life is living it better than they ever imagined possible. The story of my accident, betrayal, and revenge became something of a cautionary tale in Seattle's professional circles. It served as a reminder that actions have consequences, that betrayal demands a price, and that underestimating someone who has survived near death can be a fatal mistake. I rarely think about Sarah and Daniel anymore. They made their choices, paid the price for those choices, and faded into the irrelevance they deserved. My focus is on the future I'm building with Jennifer and Emma, on the career that challenges me every day, and on the knowledge that I survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger than I had ever been before. Sometimes the most devastating setbacks turn out to be the greatest opportunities for growth and renewal. My brother and my wife thought they could steal my life while I was unconscious and helpless. Instead, they gave me the motivation to build a better life than I had ever thought possible. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.